Today on Would You Believe It, we'll meet the 14-year-old schoolboy who invented television. Hear ghostly tales of a notorious New England jail, which is now one of the strangest restaurants in the world. Learn the true story behind one of America's most famous icons, the Liberty Bell, and how it was saved from the scrap heap. And see the unlikely inhabitants of a quiet Southern California residence. We'll visit the strange, the bizarre, and the unexpected on Would You Believe It? This is a story for everyone who was ever told to turn off the television set and do their homework. It's a story of a boy who, because he did his homework, turned on television for the whole world. The boy's name was Philo T. Farnsworth. He lived here in Rigby, Idaho, and at the age of 14, he invented television. If you find that hard to believe, then you can imagine the reaction of radio giant RCA when in 1932 they were starting up their television division, only to discover that the patents on television were already held by Philo Farnsworth of Rigby, Idaho. Philo was born here in Beaver, Utah. His father was poor but encouraged his children to follow their imaginations. When Philo was a young boy, the family moved to Rigby, Idaho. Here Philo found to his excitement they had the very latest thing, electricity. Philo was in his element, tinkering with the electricity generator on his uncle's farm, dreaming of a future it seemed only he could envision. His greatest pleasure was listening to the newly invented radio. He told his girlfriend, one day pictures will be sent this way. She was fascinated by his descriptions of the future. The young Philo followed developments in science avidly. He saw the work that was being done by Bayard and Nipkow and knew that they were on the wrong track. Philo realized that the development of television depended on the cathode ray tube. By focusing a picture onto the light-sensitized front end of such a tube, he could create electrons. These could then be used to send an electrical signal to a similar tube where the sequence of electrons would be recreated and fired back at a phosphorescent screen, creating a picture. When he left school, he persuaded an investor to fund development of this cathode ray tube, and he and his young wife moved to California to start work. The results of Philo's early work can be seen here in Rigby at the Town Museum. This is one of his first tubes. The creation of these required very exact glass shapes. Philo's brother-in-law, Cliff, studied glass blowing, and soon he was turning out a line of tubes for Philo's research. At last, Philo's years of research and development paid off. His first experiment had a camera in one room and a receiver next door. He had hoped to transmit a two-dimensional static shape, but the person in the room with the camera had a cigarette, and the image that was received was of swirling smoke. His television could broadcast moving pictures. Philo Farnsworth was a success. Philo moved his now growing company to Philadelphia, where rival company RCA was also experimenting. By using his constantly improving receivers, Farnsworth could even tune into RCA's experimental broadcast to monitor their progress. To prove that television was a serious proposition, Farnsworth had to start regular broadcasts. For 10 days, he broadcast from the Franklin Institute. The viewers loved it. Television was here to stay. It was at this time that RCA filed their lawsuit, contending Farnsworth's right to hold the patent on television. At the very heart of RCA's suit was the reasonable claim that a 14-year-old boy could not have invented television. Philo was forced to show every piece of research he had ever done in order to prove that the invention was his. Luckily, he had been meticulous in keeping his records over the years. His books are his working diaries. They show every experiment on the road to creating television. Despite all this proof, the case was strong for RCA until Philo brought on his star witness, Mr. Tolman, Philo's old high school chemistry teacher. Finally, the world was to hear how a 14-year-old farm boy had invented television. Mr. Tolman told the court of the day an excited Philo had burst into his schoolroom. The young boy had been plowing fields on his uncle's farm and had been inspired. He could create moving pictures by dividing an image into lines, much like the plowed furrows of a field. To the bewilderment of his teacher, the young Philo had hurriedly sketched the device he would one day build, his image dissector, better known today as a television camera. This is the sketch Philo made all those years ago. RCA's lawsuit was thrown out, and the company was ordered to pay a license fee to Farnsworth to use his invention, leaving Philo free to return to his work. The way was clear for both companies to develop television sets and start making programs. Philo's own company was eventually sold to ITT, and he retired to Utah. Years later, Philo himself wasn't so sure about television. He often criticized programs, telling his wife Pam that he wished he'd never invented it. In 1969, however, Philo's childhood dream was fulfilled as he watched live pictures beamed back from the moon. The fantasy of a young boy from Idaho had become a reality for the whole world. Would you believe it? Prison. Slamming doors, clinking locks. The dank halls filled with the echo of distant shouted orders. But here in the Concord City Jail, the regime has changed, and the convicts are gone. Strangely, every day the cells are still filled with people. Today, the only clinking is the sound of cutlery, and the only orders being shouted are for fajitas and large nachos. That's because what was once the Concord County Police Station and Jail in Concord, New Hampshire, is now Tio Juan's, a Mexican restaurant with a difference. For 75 years, far from serving food, the people in this building were serving jail terms, housed in 16 cells, often with up to 7 others. When the jail closed in 1975, a local entrepreneur had the idea that with the right spin, the public might even pay for prison food. So he redecorated the jail cells with a new coat of paint, adjusted the lighting, then altered the menu. Now, after 25 years, visitors from far and wide have made Concord Jail one of the premier attractions of the city, enjoying becoming a captive clientele, even if only for an evening. Every bar, every lock, every old lamp is an original fitting, from darker days when some of New England's most dangerous criminals were imprisoned here. Often people seated at tables in the cells even request their waiters slam the cell doors shut to make their experience that much more unpleasant. A former inmate once even asked to be seated in his old cell, reveling in the opportunity to ask for his door to be kept unlocked. While some customers come with morbid curiosity, most just enjoy the novelty of eating in a place just a little out of the ordinary. It seems just so long as they behave, everyone gets early parole and goes home at the end of the evening. Despite the new look, the notorious history of this building has not been forgotten completely. Some employees suggest there is at least one inmate who served well beyond his life term and is still here.
2 inmates that had committed suicide here. One had hung himself, and the story behind that is he was a local resident. He was arrested for a crime that he allegedly did not commit, and was public knowledge that he was not the one who did it. And it was a young man, and he eventually hung himself in one of the cells. The cell we're sitting in here, there was an inmate that committed suicide by taking his mattress off his bed. He put it up against the cell door and set it on fire, and they weren't able to get to him. We have a young lady who was a manager here a few years ago, was in the ladies' room, and as she came out, so she went in the ladies' room, there's a large mirror in there, and the image of the ghost was in the mirror. She quit the next day. She was terrified. She actually quit the next day. And myself, one night as I was closing the restaurant, I was doing my rounds, walking through, and there's a coffee machine, and it was still on with a pot of coffee. I turned the machine off, I took the pot of coffee into the kitchen, I emptied it, and I did my rounds. As I came back through, and I was the only one in the restaurant, the coffee machine had been turned back on, and there was a full pot of coffee sitting there. And I don't drink coffee, so I know it wasn't me.
Even the hauntings don't seem to deter visitors from turning themselves in, and locals go stir-crazy just to get a table. Most nights, every one of the 16 cells is full. So this is another case of overcrowded jails?
Oh no, not at all. No overcrowding in this jail. It's very comfortable.
In fact, Tio Juan's is so liberal, this is the only jail in the world where the inmates are asked to go home at night. Would you believe it? This is Bodmin Moor, a mysterious landscape in Cornwall, England. Myths and legends abound in these parts, recounting tales of a notorious beast that stalks these lands. But the tireless search by local farmers to track this creature to its lair has proven fruitless until now. For a likely place to discover the beast of Bodmin lies behind these doors. A den filled with a collection of roguish animals. But if it is here, you'll have to look very, very closely. Because inside you'll find no cages or pits to contain it, just hundreds upon hundreds of its companions in the animal kingdom. This bizarre menagerie didn't sweep in off the moors, however. It came from the mind of one man, Walter Potter, a 19th century amateur taxidermist who practiced his craft since he was a boy. His strange fascination with his assortment of preserved nature started when he stuffed a beloved pet bird after it was killed by a cat. Potter loved animals and how they looked in nature and studied their postures with an expert's eye. As word of his taxidermic talent spread, local farmers brought him deceased specimens from their fields. Slowly, the number of stuffed birds, farm animals, and other wildlife built up so much, Walter was running out of space and didn't know what to do with them. After reading a nursery rhyme book, he came up with a wonderful solution. This is the story of the famous poem, Who Killed Cock Robin, told using the many animal figures he'd created. This animal tableau took 7 years to complete, in extraordinary, painstaking detail. Each animal illustrates a character from the poem. Who'll be the parson? I, said the rook. With my little book, I'll be the parson. And here's the bull who rang the bell. And the unfortunate Cock Robin's coffin. Also sitting in this tree is the murderer himself, the sparrow with his bow and arrow. As his collection grew, so did the number of strange and diverse items, but he continued producing his animal groups, like this one, the guinea pig's cricket match. Every limb, every nose, every last paw has been carefully positioned to recreate the activities of humans. The intricacy of his work, while crude by today's standards, is remarkable. He even made these miniature instruments for his guinea pig brass band. Potter made his living selling tableaux like these to wealthy industrialists who lived in grimy cities and craved their own slice of country life to display in their townhouses. Potter was always certain his customers were the only ones to pay a high price for his work, adamant no animals be killed, especially for his craft. He was sure to only accept those that he was satisfied had died naturally or by unfortunate accident. However, one terrible tale told of a killer who's responsible for this playful scene, 18 gentlemanly squirrels enjoying their den. But this is no ordinary woodland home. This is an illicit gambling den. Ironically, their murderer now sits in the very next case, not a bloodthirsty criminal, but innocent-looking Spot, the farm dog, who once had an unhealthy appetite for squirrels. This class of disobedient rabbits is one of the most enchanting pieces on show. Every face seems to be full of life, charm, and of course, mischief. Potter always kept his eyes open for anything he could use to make his work more realistic. When he discovered a company who made glass eyes, he became their #1 customer. Most of these exhibits are over 100 years old. Known as humorous taxidermy, they are now an important record of Victorian hobbies and interests. Demand for Potter's work became so great, he had to build a museum and workshop, open daily for captivated adults and children alike. And when they visited, he was always on hand to tell his guests all about the animals they saw. As the creatures he received became steadily more diverse, so did his scenes, like this two-headed sheep and this two-headed cow brought to him by a farmer. It lived for several hours. This is one of Potter's most famous freakish creations, the strange monkey riding a goat, made when none of his scenes required either of these poor characters. This was Walter's last piece. The happy scene is a kitten's wedding. Right up until his death in 1919, this keen naturalist was insistent no animal brought to his workshop was ever harmed for his work, personally ensuring his museum of curiosities never killed a cat. or any other creature for that matter. Now housed in Cornwall's Jamaica Inn, notorious for its connections with smugglers and pirates, the Potter Collection, displaying its unique magical charm, can certainly consider itself a hidden treasure. Would you believe it? Here in the suburbs of Orange County, California, is a house with a very strange collection of residents. This peaceful street may look ordinary enough, but appearances can be deceiving. The people who live here, with their basketball hoops and well-tended lawns, don't ever talk with the neighbors here at the Casa de Tortuga. They're never invited over for a barbecue, and they don't discuss the ball game while polishing their car. That's because the residents of this house are turtles and tortoises, over 800 of them. The Casa de Tortuga was founded here in 1978 by Walter Hill. Although he owns the house, he doesn't live here. No humans do. In this room are the many turtles of the house. Indoors in their climate-controlled tanks, they can be monitored constantly. Every day, the Casa de Tortuga runs tours so that visitors and enthusiasts can see the collection. Safe in their small glass-sided worlds, the turtles while away the days peering out at a constant stream of curious human visitors. Outdoors, the backyard is the realm of this magnificent tortoise. Its name is Rodolfo and weighs over 500 pounds. And this beautifully landscaped pond is home to more than 100 turtles and tortoises who revel in the warmth of the California sun. Just like their neighbors, the tortoises and turtles like nothing more than hanging out by the pool. In fact, the Casa de Tortuga seems to fit in perfectly in this quiet neighborhood. And why not? They mind their own business, they don't want to borrow the lawnmower, and they never play their music loud. Ha! Would you believe it? The Liberty Bell, a proud symbol of freedom and independence. Known the world over as the bell which chimed for the liberation of America and the birth of a nation. Residing majestically in a specially built pavilion here in the heart of Philadelphia, its ideals have been heard by generations of free Americans. Proclaim liberty throughout all the land unto all the inhabitants thereof. But despite its clear message, the Liberty Bell has become one of the world's most misunderstood monuments. For example, the bell was not intended to celebrate Independence Day. Nor was it ordered from Pass and Stow, as it reads on the inscription. The bell isn't owned by the city of Philadelphia, and the famous split in its side is not the crack that prevents it from being rung. Public misconceptions about the bell have existed as long as the bell itself. In fact, historians are still unclear precisely why the bell was made at all, since it was cast 25 years before independence was even declared. Most experts believe the inscription does proclaim liberty, though not of a nation, but of a forward-thinking state. In 1701, William Penn issued his extraordinary Charter of Privileges, turning the legislative power of Pennsylvania over to its citizens. It's believed the city commissioned a bell to celebrate the charter's 50th anniversary from the most accomplished bell makers in the world, not in liberated America, but here in London, England, at the Whitechapel Bell Foundry. Their original mold for the grand bell, which came to symbolize so much, had very humble beginnings, made from clay, sand, loam, goat hair, and horse manure. Finally, the inscription was tapped into the mold, complete with the controversial spelling of the word Pennsylvania, and the bell was cast. Nearly a year after it was ordered, the bell arrived in Pennsylvania, safe and sound. That is, until the happy recipients went to try the sound. Sadly, The first noise to come from their new bell was a rather toneless clang. The bell was too brittle, and it cracked. But the makers, having produced perfect bells for other very famous customers, including London's Big Ben, still contest this version of history, saying the overzealous townsfolk had struck the bell incorrectly.
It does appear that it in fact cracked whilst being clocked, and that is that rather than swinging the bell, because the bell was supplied with swinging fittings, they simply tied a rope to the clapper and pulled the clapper up onto the bell, and of course that has a dampening effect if it's not done properly, and as a result the bell cracked.
But the cracked bell, looking much like this one, needed to be replaced. To avoid the great cost of returning it to England, two American foundry owners, John Pass and John Stowe, living near Philadelphia, were engaged to melt down and recast the cracked bell. These men, who'd never made a bell, decided the new mixture needed to contain more copper. Unfortunately, when their new casting was wrung out across the city, the reaction was anything but resounding. So they cast it again. Once rehung here in the State House, it rang for the First Continental Congress, for the Battle of Lexington and Concord. Then in 1776, it received its most resonant tolling when it announced the reading of the Declaration of Independence. The bell was not, as is widely believed, the first bell to sound on the 4th of July in 1776. In fact, no bells sounded at all until the 8th of July, because the declaration which was to change the world had been sent to the printers. A year later, all the bells fell silent when the British occupied Philadelphia. Silent because the cunning citizens, knowing the British would melt down their bells to make cannons, had removed them from the city before the invaders arrived. So the great bell spent many months hidden under the floorboards of a nearby church. Once restored to its lofty position, it again rang triumphant for numerous important occasions. It was only after a long period someone noticed a small crack had developed in its side. But the bell's dramatic fracture was only made when they fixed the thin crack by drilling along it and attaching tunable pins to retain the bell's tone. But this flaw didn't stop the bell from being rung. It's widely agreed it was on George Washington's birthday, 1846, the bell received its final crack, in a tiny hairline stretching over 2 feet around the bell. This proved to be the death knell for the Liberty Bell. After holding out for so long, Path and Stowe's bell, which had been their first and last bell, had finally succumbed to a fatal flaw. In their second casting, they had poured in too much tin. But the bell's future was secure, thanks to its iconic status, not as a symbol of the American Revolution, but for the anti-slavery movement. The bell, previously known only as the Great Bell, was used on the front page of an anti-slavery magazine, Liberty, and another printed a poem called The Liberty Bell, and the name seemed to fit. A few years later, a fictional story about an old man ringing the bell upon the Declaration of Independence also used the name Liberty Bell. The story captured the public's imagination, so the confused history of the Liberty Bell was set forever. Today, the bell is on display 24 hours a day, but a final misconception is that it's owned by the city of Philadelphia. It isn't. In 1828, long forgotten in the rotting State House tower, the bell was given to another foundry owner, John Wilbank, as part payment for a new bell. When he found the cost of removing it far outweighed its worth as scrap, he refused to take it. While technically still owned by him, his descendants gave it to the city on a permanent loan. So the bell, which today is considered by all Americans as worth its weight in gold, at one time wasn't even worth its weight in scrap. Would you believe it?